You've spent an entire career fighting fires and rescuing the injured, sick, and dying. But that's all over now. What do you do when the sirens stop, you've hung up your gear, and you walk out of the firehouse for the last time? What do you do with your life when the smoke clears? Welcome back to the When the Smoke Clears podcast. I'm Russell Miles. I'm here with Tony Ben Cosme. Thank you very much for joining us again for another interview with someone who has lived a full career in the fire service and is now living life on the other side. Thanks again to everyone for all your support. We really appreciate it. And if you want to support the podcast, you can leave us reviews on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're listening to. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/whenthesmokeclears and donate money there. All that money goes to covering the costs that come with running the podcast. None of it goes to us personally. So any way you want to support, we appreciate it. So thank you again. So Tony, who do we have with us today?
Thanks, Russ. This next guest is it's a pleasure. I'm so happy that she came and decided to tell her story on our podcast. I want to thank everybody again, just to reiterate what Russ said. Appreciate our support. Looking forward to more support, and we can try to continue to get good interviews for you to listen to and learn more about the history of Montgomery County and some of the good people we had working for us. Our next guest, I thought she was a great leader. She was a go-to person for me when I needed to listen to people and talk to people about how to do this job. She's one of our very few female firefighters in Montgomery County, and she went up the ranks pretty high. She was very, very good at her job. She retired as an assistant chief with 25 years of service. She was well-liked, well-respected throughout the county during her time in Montgomery County. I often said when she was in charge, I remember as a young lieutenant, when she was in charge, it was like your big sister was watching over you when she was the battalion chief working for her. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you, I consider her a very important piece of my career, Vanessa DeVries. Thanks for coming, Vanessa. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here with you all today.
We are honored to have you. And
yes, absolutely.
One thing that you may not know, in fact, I know that you don't know, is that in a way you are partly responsible for this podcast existing. So
really?
Let me explain that.
Little history.
Yes. So I was hired 2005, did my rookie time at Glen Echo on C shift. Finished my rookie time, got moved to B shift. Was there for a few months, started getting detailed out, got detailed to Company 12 for a few shifts. Really liked it there, but there was no openings. I didn't want to stay at Glen Echo because it was just too slow. I wanted to be a little busier, but I didn't know anyone there. I didn't have any connection. But somehow during my details there, you were the battalion chief in Battalion 1 on B shift at the time, and we bumped into each other. And I must have made some mention that I wanted to come to Company 12. And Scott Kittner was getting ready to be promoted to master. He was on B shift at 12. And I think you may not remember it, but I think that maybe you filled out the paperwork for me or something like that, because the next thing I knew, once Kittner was transferred, I looked at the transfer list and I was transferred to Company 12 on the B shift.
Yeah, I do think I pushed for you to get there.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I got there, and first, thank you very much for that, because that was great. I got there, and at the time, Lieutenant Eddie Norris was the lieutenant there, yes. And he eventually got promoted to captain. And who replaced him on 12B shift? Lieutenant Tony Ben Cosme.
Yeah.
So that was when we first got to meet. Our relationship formed from there. Fast forward several years, and the podcast is here. So thank you, Vanessa DeVries, for helping to create the When the Smoke Clears podcast.
She set the seeds.
Yes, yeah, we had a great time there on B shift. A couple.
Absolutely.
We did.
Yes. So, with all that being said, again, thank you for being on the show. And now we want to get to you. So we love to hear about how our guest came up. So tell us a little bit about where you were born and what life was like coming up for you.
So I was born in Alexandria, Virginia. I lived there for about 18 months with my parents. At that point, my parents separated, and my mom and I moved to PG County. We lived in Forestville for a couple years till she met my stepfather, and he bought a house in Upper Marlboro, and I grew up in Upper Marlboro. And normal childhood. I remember in your questions, sports or anything, I did nothing. I was basically, I was outdoors a lot. I was very lucky. My parents bought a place in the mountains, so we spent a lot of weekends in the mountains. And then when I turned 13, they bought a beach cottage down here in Calvert County. So I spent a lot of time at the beach. But they said when I was probably about 4 years old, I started saying I wanted to be a firefighter.
Wow.
At 4 years old.
4 years old. They said anybody in my family said at 4 years old, I said I wanted to be a firefighter. So when I turned 16, so let me backtrack. The high school I went to was Frederick Douglass High School in Prince George's County. It's bigger now, but I think at the time it was probably one of the smallest high schools in PG. Basically, and to this day, when you go down Croom Road, there is Fire Station 45, a cornfield, and Frederick Douglass High School.
Wow.
So, at the time it was a volunteer firehouse. It was a 100% volunteer firehouse. It had, except for it had the one shift man and then the day staffing, but otherwise mostly was a volunteer firehouse. So I can't say 100% volunteer. So when I turned 16, I joined that firehouse.
Okay.
It had, believe it or not, pretty strict requirements within itself, not necessarily PG County standards, but you had to, within the 18 months, become fire certified and certified to ride the ambulance. So I immediately did the fire training. There was what was called the volunteer recruit school, where you went for 32 hours, a Saturday, Sunday, and you were qualified to do interior firefighting in PG County at the time.
Okay.
This was in 1985. Looking back, that's kind of crazy.
A lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, well, I remember going on my first fire, and they brought me back in the room later because they told me to go search a room, and I went by myself, and I got scared. I was 16 years old. They showed me the wall. I did what I was supposed to do with the wall. You could see my handprints, and I hit the bed. I turned around and went the other way, and you could see my handprints in the soot where they went, and they turned and went the other way, and I found somebody, and I didn't want to do that by myself anymore, which is understandable. Then I guess some of the guys realized I was the only girl at the firehouse. Some of the guys, the older guys, took me under their wing. And shortly after that, a good friend of all of ours joined, Cliff Billingsley.
All right. Yeah.
And he was the only black guy at the station. So I was the girl. He was the black guy. He had a nickname. I don't know if he told you I know he did this podcast. They called him Brown Baby, and they called me Peanut because I was small.
Okay.
So we had these two nicknames, and I think everybody was okay with it at the time. But the interesting part was we both were fire certified, and at the time you just needed advanced first aid to ride the ambulance. So and that was a 40-hour class, and then EMT I think at the time was like 100 hours. So Cliff and I both decided we were going to take EMT because we were like, why do we want to take this 40-hour class when we just take a little bit more and get our EMT out of the way? And they said, well, nobody around here has ever done that. You two can go ahead and try, but you're both going to fail.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. He and I made a pact right at that moment that we were not going to fail EMT.
Okay.
And he and I took EMT and we did not fail.
Excellent.
So, yep. So then along comes this guy, his name Thomas Sebastian. He was one of the volunteers there at 45. And so he gives me this application for because he had known I at this point, I graduated high school and I was still hanging around the firehouse. And he gives me an application for Montgomery County Fire. I knew nothing about Montgomery County Fire Department. So I filled it out, didn't think anything of it, mailed it off, because that's what you did back then. You mailed off applications.
Yeah, no.
I also applied for Andrews Air Force Base.
Okay.
Because I really didn't know what else to do. You know, I was probably at this point 17, because I graduated early. I was young. I was 17 and a half when I graduated. I was working at a gas station, full service gas station. Back then, when you were a gas station attendant, you stood at the gas pumps, you had money in your pocket and a credit card machine, and people expected full service, which meant that you pumped the gas, you checked the oil, you cleaned the windshields. That's what I did.
Yeah.
And then, so that was my job. And then when September came around, I did a year at University of Maryland, and then still volunteered at the firehouse, you know, on my off times. So I did not get hired by Andrews Air Force Base. I continued to take, you know, fire classes. I moved on, took basic fire. I had my EMT, you know, other MIFRE classes. And I guess around January, I got a letter to come take a written test for Montgomery County Fire. So I take it, and I don't hear anything else for about 2 more months. And then I start getting these phone calls. Again, I knew nothing about Montgomery County Fire. I'd been in PG Fire, which was an established fire department at this time. You know, all the guys had matching uniforms. They all had their patches that said Prince George's County Fire Department on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I got my first phone call from Sandy Spring Fire Department to come do an interview. And so I said, okay. So it was at 7 o'clock at night, which I thought was a little weird, but whatever. So I drove on up there, and I remember going into this room, and now I know I went into the boardroom because I was getting interviewed by the Sandy Spring Volunteer Board of Directors. And I walked into this room and I sat down with them, and they asked me a whole list of questions. And I remember one of them they asked me was, do you prefer to ride an ambulance or a fire engine? And I said, well, a fire engine. And they said, okay, well, thank you very much, and sent me on my way, and nothing. And I think I got a rejection letter, and I said, okay, well, whatever. And then Kensington, get an interview with Kensington. Well, this one again was, I believe, in the evening, and, you know, same thing, but I don't remember the list of questions, did not get hired. And then I get this interview with Hillendale Fire Department, and that one was during the day. And I was like, okay, well, this one's a little different.
Okay.
So I go in, and now nobody had asked me to bring anything. Like, they were just like, show up. No resume, nothing, just show up. So I come to this one, and I'm getting interviewed by a person in a uniform, one person. And it turned out at the time he retired as a Chief Allwing. He was at the time a captain, the equivalent of the battalion chief. So he was the one-on-one interview and I walk in, I'm talking to him. He said, well, where's your resume? And I said, well, sir, I don't have one. You know, nobody has asked me for one. And I had told him about my past interviews. And he said, well, I would kind of like one. And I said, well, I'll put one together for you and I can drive it back up here. And he said, no, here's a fax number. You can just fax it to me. And so I did. And I told him all my training. And he said, okay. He said, well, you know, we had a very good talk. And he said, I'm going to be very honest with you. He said, our department is actively recruiting firefighters. Female firefighters. He said, we have open positions for a female firefighter. So Montgomery County at this era had positions that were held for females, for blacks, and then I guess whatever was left went to whoever, because there was a mandate to hire minorities.
Right.
The positions were dictated who was going to fill them, which, you know, all this was, I mean, I was a child. Like I said, I was 18 years old. This was I just wanted a job.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
So I said, okay. So I went home, did my homework, got them a typewriter because we didn't have computers.
Typewriter, yeah.
Typed up my resume and may have had a fax, maybe not. Maybe I did mail it to him or get it up to him. I don't remember back then. So got him the resume, and in the meantime had two more letters came in the mail, one for Tacoma Park and one for Cabin John for interviews. So I then get a letter in the mail the day before the interviews for Cabin John and Tacoma with a conditional offer from Hillendale for a job.
All right.
Yep. So I canceled my interviews for the other two. My conditional offer was that I get through all the testing, including the entrance exam, the physical entrance ability exam, and any medical testing, etc. So I was very confident in myself. I said, I'm going to get through all that. I'm not even going to worry about these other interviews, because I'd had such a good interview with Chief Allwing at the time. So I start steadfast going through everything I need to go through, going through all my testing. I found out that there was one other female competing for the job too. We both had conditional offers, and basically it was whoever could get through everything first got the job. And stuff like that pushes me. So I pushed harder. I went back to the daytime folks at 45 and I showed them my letter. I said, hey, I got this job offer. And they said, we are going to help you get a job.
All right.
They did. They worked with me. They, they asked me what was on the test, because, they told us what was on the test and the physical test, and they helped me condition for it. And I went up there and took it and got through it all and got the job. So I started in September of 1987. I got hired for 1 week. I was in the station, and then I went into an academy. So the academy at that time was not like the academy that everybody does now. And the only reason I needed to go into the academy was because I had MIFRE Basic. I did not have Firefighter 1 and Firefighter 2, because MIFRE at the time did not have a Firefighter 1 and a Firefighter 2 class, or if they did, it was just at the beginnings, where Montgomery County Fire had a Firefighter 1, a Firefighter 2, and a Firefighter 3 program. And that's some of the conflict to this day that MIFRE and Montgomery County still have, is because Montgomery County had their own training academy with their own regiments and their own curriculums. If you all are familiar with that at all.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's a process.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into this academy. Our academy was made up of other people from other corporations that had been hired, along with some Prince William County people and some volunteers. So it was just whoever needed Fire 1, whoever needed Fire 2. So some people just took Fire 1, and some folks joined us for the Fire 2. The Prince William County people went the whole way with us, and some of the volunteers went the whole way with us. Because I had EMT, I was only in for Fire 1, Fire 2, and the EVOC. And then I went back to Hillendale. So my academy was 7 weeks.
Okay.
And then back to Hillendale I went. So I was originally assigned to Station 24.
Mm-hmm.
Is this good? You want me to keep going, or is there another question?
No. You're
going.
Keep
Okay.
going. You're breaking it down chronologically for us. Keep going.
Okay. So I get assigned to Station 24, and so I turned 19 in the academy. That's something I should throw out there. So I turned 19 in the academy, so I still was very young. Matter of fact, the day I turned 19, we rappelled off the fire tower. Because I remember that distinctly.
That's what we used to do. We used to do that. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So again, very young. And I know we hire a lot of young folks in Montgomery County now. And I can tell you, being hired young, you're at that in-between age where you don't know if you're an adult, you're a child, and you're thrown into all these adults.
Mm-hmm.
So that in life is challenging too. So anyway, so I go to Station 24. It's good shift. At the time, engine, ambulance, and truck. The lieutenant on the shift was now what is considered a captain station commander. It's a shift I go to. And they're a great group of guys. They're all older.
Who was the lieutenant?
It was Garcio.
Garcia. Got it.
who retired as the operations chief some
Yes,
years
he-
ago.
Mhm.
So great guy. One of the things, it's a funny story that I struggled with. So I would never ride the truck when I was there, obviously, because the truck had 3 personnel and it was a tractor drawn. But they wanted to make sure I had all the skills. So one thing I struggled with was starting saws. Because back then saws were finicky and they still can be to this day. So my job every day was to start the saw. So I was an expert at starting saws. So, I worked there at 24 and it was a good shift. Doug Finlayson was one of my favorite people there, and he nicknamed me Munchkin, and he called me that for quite a while, and everything was going great. And they were all very kind, and they took me under their wing. And at some point, Doug stopped calling me Munchkin, but I didn't think much of it. So we got a detail driver in one day, and he hit a mailbox going on a call, laying out. So he was detailed with us for a couple shifts. He had come from company 12. Well, the next shift, we go out for a drill because we're going to lay out multiple times just to make sure that we don't hit mailboxes again going into driveways. So we go on this drill. We're on this drill for probably 4 hours.
Wow.
Laying out, I'm pulling a line, re-rack it. Laying out, pulling a line, re-rack it.
And you're just a fire 1 or 2 at this point, right?
Yeah, I've been there for probably a couple months. So we're doing this drill.
You're new. Yeah, you're
new. Yeah. So the driver who is being punished at some point comes up to me and apologizes, said, "I'm very sorry." And I'm like, "It's okay. We're going to get through this." Well, towards the end, I was just done, as anybody would be. So we get back to the station, and Lieutenant Garcia at the time comes up to me and he says, "You didn't do so good there towards the end." And I said, "I was very tired. 4 hours is a long time for anybody to drill." And he said, "Yeah." He's like, "We're going to have to do some thinking about this." And I said, "Okay." And I just went on with my day. Didn't think much of it. And what I didn't know, what was running on the background, was they put me on a shift because, remember, I got hired as a female or a female position. The shift I went on had a female firefighter. She had not performed. So Hillendale Fire Department had fired her.
Oh, wow.
She had since reapplied and gotten hired by another corporation. And since the other corporation had hired her and she was doing okay, she was suing Hillendale because she was able to do the job with another corporation.
Whoa.
Okay.
So they not only hired me, but they put me on the same shift with the same exact people who were involved in a lawsuit.
And they were kind of angry at her, but then they kind of started.
They were involved in a lawsuit. So they were actively being depositioned by lawyers, and I didn't know any of this was running in the background. So Doug Finlayson stopped calling me Munchkin because Garcia was worried that if anything happened, that giving me a nickname might be construed as bad. He, was starting to worry about my performance because, they were walking on eggshells, and I was thrown into the mess of it.
Gotcha.
A sip of water.
Gotcha.
So, anyway, at somewhere during this transition, Allwang is no longer the captain at Hillendale. He'd gotten transferred to Silver Springs. So Lesnick is now the captain, battalion chief.
Lesnick, remember him?
Yeah. So Garcia goes and talks to Lesnick, and Lesnick says, well, maybe the best thing is to move her down to 12, just because he knows what's going on in the background. So he probably sees, the backstory of what's really going on. So it's decided in a couple shifts that I'll move down to 12. So Garcia, pulls me aside, says, hey, in like 3 shifts, you're going to move down to station 12 and they're going to switch so-and-so up here. And I said, okay, whatever. So the very last day I'm at 24, we run our first 2 house fire off of Blick Drive, and we get there and like the house is on fire. Garcia and I go in, put the fire out. I mean, and it was on fire. And we come out and he's like, you did fine. And I said, I'm going to do fine. With all due respect, I said, that drill we did is nothing to measure anything on. I said, you had me out there for 4 hours, 4 hours straight, no breaks. I mean, I get you were on whatever mission, but that was just hard.
Mhm.
Anybody would have struggled with that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I move on to Station 12, and and I'm living in my little Hillendale bubble.
Mhm.
At the county's now taking over, so we're slowly, moving to being Montgomery County Fire as opposed to the corporation, but we're still
Corporations.
kind of being the corporation. So now I'm at 12. There was some volunteers here, but the volunteer chief is at 12. We see him more. But I still don't really have you don't really know what's going on with other stations unless you get detailed out. And I'm not really ever detailed out yet because I'm still kind of new. And so at 12, I stay for a couple shifts, but they have extra people at 12. So they did inform me that at this point I will get detailed some, which is fine. But, they said that they're going to work with me, get me cut loose to be an ambulance driver. We're going to start working on becoming an engine driver, all that. We'll get your license. These guys, they basically were like a bunch of dads. The rookie on the shift had 13 years on.
Wow.
Wow.
He was actually the same guy that had the issue with driving that was detailed to 24 that day.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was super excited for me to be there because now I could drive the medic unit. And he wouldn't have to drive the medic unit every day because 12 at that point just had an engine in the medic unit. That was the only thing there. So it was a 1-in-1. So it was a firefighter and a medic on the medic unit. So they pretty quickly got me on the medic unit driving so that none of them had to drive it. And I was on the medic unit a lot with a very young medic, Mike McAdams.
Okay.
And he and I spent a lot of time on there together, and he maybe had 2 years on me, and we had a good time together. And every day he would come back and he would say to me, he would draw on the board, EMS equals $signs. And I would say, okay,
Yeah.
okay, Mike, I get it. He's like, you need to take the medic class. I'm like, I'll think about it. I said, let me get my goals taken care of first, because I wanted to get my classes out of the way. So I work on getting my license, my B license. So Mike and I do that at the same time.
Hey, real quick, to get it to be an engine driver back in those days. Now, 12. How did you get your B license? Where did you go to get your B license? Because you needed to be a CDL driver with a B license to even start wagon stuff.
Right. So they didn't have CDLs at the time. You just went and got a B license. It was before the CDL process.
Okay. All right.
So Mike and I both went to the MVA. We got our B license.
Okay.
And then CDLs came along a couple years later, and if you had a license, they said, go to MVA, study the book, and test out on anything that you're qualified for, and you could get that transferred to a CDL without having to take the test. And they recommended that.
Oh,
So all of us went up, like anybody that had a license went up there and did that. Well, a majority. And I still have a CDL to this day from doing that.
Yep.
I've never driven a CDL or commercial vehicle, but
you can if you need to.
Yeah.
Can if I need to.
Just in case.
Just in case. Because I've always been taught, don't get rid of anything, any certifications that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he and I both went up there and tested out the same day together. The difference was, he was a medic and I was still a firefighter. So I got my wagon driving stuff out of the way. And then about that time, they were offering a CRT class, and he pushed me to take it. So I took the CRT class that they paid me to take every Wednesday. And I took it, finished it, and continued back at Hillendale. And about that time, both of the senior drivers got hurt, senior wagon drivers. So I proceeded to drive every day.
Drive a wagon every day.
Yep.
Wow.
Nice.
How many years you have at this point?
So this is probably all through 88 going into 89. So still young because I got hired in 87. So this is very young still.
Okay,
They pushed me through very quickly to 89, 88 to 89 to maybe on touching 90, within 2 years, I'm very quickly being the wagon driver.
okay, since you got hired in the corporation, and we asked people that got hired in corporations, which is most of the interviews we have now, the very few that we haven't been corporation employees. The thought process of the people that are there, was there scared? I mean, I know people say they were scared, but what was the feeling like in Hillendale for you? You're new, you're coming in, and these guys talk about leaving because they were given early outs and the county's taking over. What was the mindset of some of those corporation employees that had been there for a while heading into the county taking over?
So none of the guys at 12 that I worked with had that mindset because most of them were, like I said, 13 was the rookie to maybe 22 years. So they weren't in that position. They had young children still or teenage children. So they were not in a position to leave.
Okay.
And they liked their job.
Right.
So they were such a good group to work with that, their joke was that they took me under their wing, and they did. I mean, they made sure I did everything that I needed to do to prepare me.
And who was the officer there?
It was Jeff Anderson.
Jeff Anderson. I don't know who that was.
No. It was Jeff Anderson.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And just to backtrack a little bit, could you explain what CRT is?
So it was a cardiac rescue technician. It would be considered an EMTI, which I don't even think they have that now.
No.
EMTI intermediate. So the cardiac rescue technician could do everything basically but intubate. Could do almost all the same, could do similar skills to the EMTP. It was just an intermediate paramedic, and it was a quicker way to become a paramedic.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah,
So the precursor to modern paramedic.
Yeah. So you could do P. P was out there, and I eventually bridged to P, but this was the quickest way to become a paramedic was to do the CRT, and there were a lot of CRTs out there.
There were. Yeah, there were.
There were.
Gotcha.
So
okay. So yeah, continue.
Yeah. So anyway, so I'm living my best life, driving this engine every day. And so it probably was 89. So I have 2 years on, and I'm now probably 89 is when they get hurt. And I'm now the full-time engine driver.
With 2 years on. Go girl.
Yeah. And do that for about almost a year. Then they come along and they're like, hey, you remember that medic class you took? And I was like, what medic class? They're like, it's time to go become a medic. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to just do this. And they said, no, we paid you to be a medic. So you're going to go become a medic, and we're going to move you to Station 1 to become a medic.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, there's a medic unit right here. And they said, no, we're going to move you down to Station 1 to become a medic. So they moved me to Silver Spring to become a medic. Well, we're county employees, but we're not. So I moved to Silver Spring, and I get down to Station 1, and I am basically a firefighter EMT that has this medic on the side. I'm a medic intern. I can no longer drive an ambulance, and I can no longer drive an engine.
Wow.
Because I am not allowed to drive Silver Springs engines, and I'm not allowed to drive their ambulances. However, 1 week before, if I'd gotten detailed to Station 1, I could have driven as a detail person. But now that I'm assigned there, I cannot drive until I do their whole process.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. So I was like, everything I just worked for, living my best life, is gone.
So you rebooted down to the bottom again.
Yep. But I met new people, new experiences. There were a couple other women on the shift and so it was interesting to hear some of their stories. One of them was Pam Foltz.
Pam Foltz, yes.
And she had been hired before me. I think she might have been the first female hired in Montgomery County.
I think she was. Yeah.
I think she was. And I believe it's her story. She came to work one day and had urine in her turnout boots.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, you know, some of the stuff I went through, I mean, that's pretty gross.
Yeah.
That is pretty gross.
Yeah.
Nasty. Terrible.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, there were a lot of disgruntled people because there were positions that were held for people that did not look like them.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Right. Historically, those positions weren't available to other people anyway, kind of, sort of. So,
well,
yeah.
it is what it is, but
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. No, they were making a big push for to integrate the fire service with different types of people at that time. I think it was 88. And I think there were and there's going to get some blowback. But they I mean, your testimony or your story is that we often give the bad actors all the pub. It was a lot of good people, you said, that helped you, that took you under their wing. They said, listen, we're gonna look out for you. We want you to do good. And they didn't care about all that other stuff.
No, I mean, you know, I can tell you some of the biggest ones: Steve Wiseman, Jack Davis. You know, they were some of the best guys I worked with. Ronnie Ricks. I mean, that whole, you know, that Dave Rager, that whole Hellendale group, Henry Jones. I mean, all of them, Matt Trivet, all those guys that I came up with in Hellendale. You know, Tim Brown was a volunteer at the time, living at Hellendale when I first started there. You know, we were such a cohesive group, and we had fun together. So now I'm at Silver Spring.
Mm-hmm.
It's a totally different environment. It's, you know, it was fun. It was kind of crazy being in the city, totally different workforce. They assigned me to a preceptor who was extremely busy. He was getting his nursing degree, and he said, you know, I don't really have time for you. Good luck. I hope this works out for you. And I said, okay, well, we're going to try to work this out. So I pushed really hard. I'm like, you know, I get cut loose to be a medic pretty quick. And then my next step is I want to be able to drive the ambulance. I don't want to always have to be the medic. So they allow me to do that, but they're not budging on the whole engine process unless I go through their whole program. And I'm like, you know, this is just so crazy that, you know, I get having to learn the first two, but it's literally the same exact fire engine. Everybody had American LaFrancis at the time. Same fire engine, same thing. Okay, I get learning the first two, but same fire engine. Right. So about 9 or 10 months goes along, and a position opens back up at 12, and they move somebody there who doesn't want to go there. So we trade. I go back to 12. This person goes to 1. My life is good again. And I'm in a position back at 12 on my shift, same people. And there's now 3 medics because I'm a medic. And one of the wagon drivers is back. And there's another wagon driver. So we had this good rotation now. You know, we still get we all get to ride the fire engines. You know, we don't always get stuck on the medic unit, and life is good. But, you know, we do have to take details every once in a while. Right. So I get detailed one day to 25, and they have this drill set up for the night. And the drill, they have a brand new saw they just got.
Nice.
Yeah, they have this brand new saw they just got. So, you know, I'm with these people. I don't know them from Adam. So here comes the nighttime drill. I don't work at this station. So who do you think they picked first to start the saw?
You.
Yeah. They didn't know I was an expert on sorting saws.
Got him.
So, you know, I started catching on pretty quickly when I got detail places, because I didn't take a whole lot of details when I was at Hillendale because, you know, the guys got hurt. But when you started taking details out, you realized that you had to prove yourself everywhere you went.
Yeah.
Because you were not the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And as I started going around, it was interesting because a few more females were getting hired, but what was really getting hired more were black males.
Mhm.
And some of them were big. Phil Downing was one of the first ones I kind of ran into early on, and Phil was big.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I talked one day, and he had to do the same stuff. He had to prove himself everywhere he went. And that was kind of eye-opening. Here's this huge guy. Like, I get it, my size, having to prove myself. These guys were like, yeah. And I always had the attitude, I know I'm not going to be able to do everything you all can do. I'm not going to quit, but I know I'm not as strong as you.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to quit. It may take
Right.
me a little bit longer, but I'm not going to quit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as I moved up, I said, I will never ask anybody to do something that I cannot do.
All right.
Mm.
So, here's Phil, and we're talking one day, and it's almost like we had the same exact life experiences. And it was very interesting to know that I wasn't the only one out there that felt that way. And, and the two ladies I worked with at One Engine, they very rarely ever got detailed out. So, but, and just hearing some of their experiences. So I'm starting to hear that it's not just me that feels this way. And then, we also had some ladies that had labels. So that was another
Right.
thing that I was very afraid of, was getting a label. Some of them slept around.
Oh, wow.
I was there to work. And when you work with these guys for 24 hours, I mean, like, first off, I had zero interest in them. I said it would have to be somebody extremely special. I had one guy I worked with, and he, I was friends obviously with everybody I worked with, but his wife was extremely jealous of me. She would not talk to me. She would not make eye contact with me because she was very jealous I was working with her husband. And I was like, dude, if you knew the way your husband acted in this firehouse, you wouldn't want to hang out with him. I'm like, just get over yourself. So,
Yeah.
I don't want to sleep with your husband. We're working together. Move on. But there were women, that had labels, and you just, you didn't want to get that label.
Yeah.
Right. Right. It's hard to let it go once you get
Yeah.
it like that.
Yeah. So, I'm moving along, and I'm at, still at Hillendale, living my life, this is back. So I did about a year at One Engine. So I guess, 90-ish to 91. It was about nine or 10 months I did at One Engine. And then I'm back at Hillendale, living my best life because I'm comfortable there. My whole life is back again. I can do everything. And I get a phone call on the night before I'm supposed to work that I'm getting detailed. Oh, let me back up. I missed the important part. So one day I'm up at the training academy and taking a class, and my captain that had been at One Engine calls me into an office. So I go in there to talk to him, and next thing I know, he's all over me. He's got me pinned against a wall and
Oh,
kissing me.
this is
Wow.
the one you used to work with and you left
When I was at One Engine.
while you were still there.
No, I was no longer at One.
Okay.
I'm
Just
now back to
left.
Hillendale.
All right.
I the whole detail thing, I jumped ahead of
Yeah.
myself.
It's okay.
So I'm at the academy taking a class, and he called me in. So he'd been my captain at One. He's like, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? So I'm thinking to myself, okay, So I go in this room, and he pins me against the wall, and he's kissing me. And
Oh no.
I pushed him off, and I said no.
Mm.
And I go to leave, and the door is locked.
Oh my
He
God.
locked the door behind us.
He
Wow.
locked the door.
Yes. So I walk out that room and didn't say a word
Mm.
because I don't want to be labeled.
So you were kind of like, you were, they kept you silent. They silenced you by the fear of a reputational smear.
Yeah, because you don't want to be labeled.
Yeah.
Mm.
Even if the accusations
Or
were
legit.
true.
Yep.
Yeah. They're presumed to be non-legit.
Well, the problem is, as you know, no matter how much you try to keep anything a secret, everything gets out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So everything got out regardless.
No, nobody ever knew.
No, nobody knew that. Yeah. It's
Nobody
two
knew
people.
this because I
Okay.
didn't
I
tell
can
anybody.
imagine.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm going back to this detail. So this detail, they call me on a night before I'm supposed to work. and they are detailing me to the station where this captain is, because he's no longer at 1. He had been transferred to at
Okay.
some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I refused to transfer or the detail. And they say, well, you have to take the detail. And I said, I am not going to take that detail. And they said, well, you have to give us a good reason. I said, I don't want to. You can detail me anywhere else in the county. I don't want to go on that detail. And they said, all right, well, hang on. I got to make a phone call. So they called me back and they said, you have to take the detail or give us a good reason. And I said, put me on sick leave. And they said, we're going to put you on charges if you, for calling in sick or not taking the detail. And I said, I cannot work with that officer. And they said, you have to give us a good reason. And at the time, the scheduler, the person talking to me was actually Mike McAdams, and he was doing the EMS scheduling. So Mike was like, just tell me why you don't want to go there. So I told him the whole story real quick. And he was like, holy cow. You know, he's like, okay, you're not going there, but I'm going to have to report this. And I said, this is exactly why I didn't want to tell you.
I want to tell you, yeah.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, I have to report it because you told me, because, you know, he's a lieutenant and I'm a firefighter. So he reports it. And of course, now there's this investigation. So they bring me up to at the time, headquarters was on the 12th floor. And they bring me up there, do this whole investigation. And presumably they bring the captain up and do the investigation. So, and they asked me at the end, what do you want done with him? And I said, I don't want anything done with him. I just never want to work with him again, period. I don't want to talk to him. Don't want to work with him. So I never hear anything else of it. So now down the road, I'm with my husband. I get pregnant. I do light duty. I take a promotional exam while I'm on light duty, and I get promoted to lieutenant while I'm on light duty. So,
I see where this is going. Go ahead.
Right. So here I am as a lieutenant. I'm just going along my chronological order.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a lieutenant, and I'm sitting on the 12th floor doing my light duty. And they had told me I was going to go to Cabin John. And this man walks in one day and he's like, hey, by the way, you're not going to go to Cabin John. You're going to come to Kensington when you go back to full duty. And I was like, okay. I said, and who are you? He said, my name is Stevie Hobbs, and I'm going to be your captain at Station 25. And I said, okay.
All right.
So I come off of light duty and I go to Kensington, Station 25 on the C shift.
Okay.
And that was the best 3 years of my life in the fire service.
All right.
Yeah.
So what made you want to promote? I mean, you skipped over a spot where, you're fire 3, you're a medic, and
so I did. And I'm terrible at telling stories the whole way. Like, you had the storyteller already that you did. So shortly after I got hired, Captain Allwing was still the captain who retired as a chief. He said, let me give you some advice. He said, I tell this to every new person because this fire service is very, very young. He said, you can either lead or be led. And he said, I tell this to all the folks that are getting hired now, either you can lead or be led. Just remember that. And of course, working with Mike McAdams, he told me too, he's like, go get some college under your belt, which I'd had my year of college with the University of Maryland. So I had enough to be a lieutenant already when I got hired. I took all my classes right away because that's what they told you to do when you got hired. Go take whatever classes you need, become a driver. Like, I just did everything they told me to do. So I was in that position, and they said, don't ever let a promotional exam go by that you cannot take, or don't, if you're able to take it, whether you pass it or not, take it.
Yeah.
So I did.
Okay.
Yeah. They said, always take promotional exams.
So were you a master at all, or did you skip over that spot?
For a day.
Oh, so you just jumped over it almost, basically.
They basically made me a master for a day because when I want to say there was about 500 of us in county employees when I got hired, and the promotional opportunities throughout were just, I mean, basically, if you took a test, you were going to get promoted off almost any test you took.
So the department was just growing like that.
It was just growing leaps and bounds because, it was a transitional time where we were going from, we were supplementing volunteer firehouses to transitioning to where volunteers were supplementing career staffing. Because
Gotcha.
that when you were closer to the city, the district,
Right.
those stations were already pretty much career staffing, but that's a Silver Spring. And as you moved further out to where it was rural, a lot of the houses were still volunteer houses, but they were slowly, I mean, people have to work, and people, have to have 9 to 5 jobs. And so those stations were slowly starting to need career staffing.
Yeah.
So they were transitioning at this point.
Right. Good time to get hired here.
It was.
Yeah,
it was.
Absolutely.
And we're pumping out recruit class after recruit class
Mhm.
after recruit class,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were. Yep.
Yeah. So going back to your promotion to lieutenant, and now you're in Kensington. So you said that was the best 3 years of your career.
Wow.
That's a big statement.
That is.
Well, best as in with the people I worked with, and funnest maybe,
Yeah.
like, so at the time, I mean, 25, like I also call it purgatory at the time, because that place was brutal. We had just the medic unit, the truck, and the engine. And I don't know what they have now, but I know they got a lot more EMS resources than
They
one
do.
medic unit,
They do.
because everybody knows what 25 has in its first due.
Yes.
And we were running Leisure World, the apartments, plus our second and third dues. And that medic unit was brutal. And we were lucky on our shift that we had, at one point, we had 5 paramedics on our shift. And so we got lots of time on the engine and truck. Captain Hobbs and Stinky were the 2 officers.
Oh, wow.
We just we had more fun than we should have been allowed to have in a firehouse. So it just, and Stevie Hobbs is probably one of the best leaders that I ever worked for. He taught me a lot. He was very engaged with the union. He was very engaged with rules. As a young lieutenant, he brought me in there. He put me on a no detail for the first 2 months, which is not the norm. Now they're in float pools. He put me on a no detail for 2 months so that any problems that arose, I had to handle, because he wanted me to know what to do when I was getting detailed. That way I was not thrown into the fire, not knowing what to do.
Right.
That's good.
So I was a lieutenant medic, because back then that's when they had the lieutenant medics.
Yeah, it was a separate track to go
But
up.
you were still a lieutenant. So I would get detailed out to firehouses. Like, I might be the lieutenant in charge of a firehouse, even though I was a lieutenant medic. Like, there was, it was you were assigned to the medic unit, but you could also be utilized everywhere. One thing I had not done in my career yet was I'd never worked with a rescue squad, because Hillendale didn't have any. So I was not squad qualified. So he also put me over at 21 for a couple shifts so I could get squad qualified. That way he wanted me to be able to handle anything I was put up against.
Back when 21 had a rescue squad.
Yes.
That was a while ago.
Yeah, and it was funny. And I never, ever rode Squad 21 after I got qualified. But I took a lot of details to Wheaton.
Yeah.
And they would utilize me. They utilized me quite a bit down at Wheaton. There was probably about an 8-month period where every Friday I worked, I went to Wheaton. During the day, I was a squad officer, and they left me there night side by myself to be the medic.
Okay.
Yeah, it was sometimes it was just put together like overnight. I mean, you remember the way you get detailed out was fax machines. Remember, the schedule was fax machines. And the only time you found out you got detailed, if they were nice, they call you the night before. Sometimes you would get to work. Yeah, you get there and then it'd be like, oh yeah, you got to go. So
Yep. I know. And yeah, before the whole computers, it was just, you didn't know if they called you. Yeah. You had to get to work early in case you were detailed,
Right.
unless you were higher up on the chain where you didn't get detailed.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All
So,
right.
so it was a fun time at 25, and I learned a lot, even though it was brutal, totally brutal. So it was so brutal that when the captain's test came, even though I was having fun there, I was like, I'm taking this captain's test because I've got to get off this medic unit because I may not survive this.
Okay.
So, and I'm getting stronger as a human too,
Right. Right.
because I'm with some strong people that are teaching me good stuff,
Yeah.
Right.
and
Right.
I'm getting stronger being able to handle myself as a person too. And so I take the captain's test. And when the captain's test I take, I think there were 22 positions and 25 of us took it,
Okay.
because there's just not the amount of people taking tests either back then.
Yeah, I remember.
So this is in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
So I take this captain's test, and and I pass it. And I remember that the test, so it had a written component, and then it had, where you deal with the subordinate. And then I don't remember the other part, but anyway, so the written component is the part that the written component was a staffing plan, and they gave five work sites, and you had this pool of paramedics, and you had to write a staffing plan on where you're going to put the paramedics. And everybody a couple people came out of that test so angry because they were like, they wrote that test for the paramedics. Da, 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 da. And I said, okay, turn it around. You have trashmen. You have this pool of trashmen. You have 5 trash trucks. And you have to staff the 5 trash trucks. They could have wrote it that way. I said, they didn't write that for paramedics. It was a staffing plan. But there were people that were very bitter that took that test. And I just let it go because I was like, whatever.
I wouldn't. The whole paramedic thing still goes on, and to be honest with you, the simple answer to this is just look at the stats. I mean, things are what they are. Everybody has a place in this system. Everyone has somewhere to sit. I mean, to be jealous of someone else because a test is written it's just angry because you didn't do well or didn't prepare well or whatever it is. That's all that is.
And they say because and generally paramedics are college educated too. So backtracking, I did get my paramedic when I was at 25. I bridged to be an EMTP. I did everything through Montgomery County Fire. I was never a college educated paramedic. There is a big difference, I now know, between a college educated paramedic and getting your paramedic at the training academy. Not taking anything away from the training academy. College educated paramedics have a lot more education.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that by far. I was not a bad paramedic, but I'm definitely not as smart as they are. So again, I went to Peachey County schools. So don't talk to me about, you know what I mean? I don't think I'm a whole lot smarter than a whole lot of other people, but whatever.
No, I mean, it's incredible that, we want to punish the person that's got the most education. Right. I mean, we don't say if a person he went to a rescue squad class given by the University of Maryland at College Park and says, oh man, you're a college educated rescue squad guy. How could you know what you're doing? I mean, that's obscene. It's just the EMS bias is what it is. And it's not, I mean, in the department today that we work at, and then across the country, I mean, I could safely say this is across the country. These fire trucks are on the road because they're running EMS calls. Okay, they have a medic on them. Yes, yes. I mean, you tell people and they say okay, but then they turn around. I hear that works still. I've been in 33 years, so we could stop today. We could stop putting medics on the fire trucks, have it somewhere, and I can cut 300 positions tomorrow.
Yep.
Tomorrow.
The reality is that they would cut fire trucks.
I think they're doing that.
Yeah.
That is interesting you say that, because see what the future holds. I mean, I don't know. We're talking about staffing 5 more EMS units is what we're talking about doing.
Yeah,
in
I mean,
Montgomery County.
ambulances are not going away.
No.
Oh no, we need more of them.
Yeah, we need more.
Yeah.
We need more of them.
And the whole reason we got our foot in the door for 4-person staffing was Chief Carr said, "Hey, let me put paramedics on fire
trucks.
To reduce ALS response times.
Yep.
We still need fire trucks. We still need fire trucks. No one said we don't need fire trucks. We do need fire trucks. We need firefighters too.
Because there are fires.
Yes,
100%.
but we need you to be pretty good at both. This is the world we live in. You can't say I just do one thing.
Nope. No, you can't. You have to be able to do both.
Yes, you got to be able to do both.
Yep. And I think back in the day, like when the medic units ran the ALS and the BLS calls, the medics were good because they didn't lose the BLS skills. And probably the medics that ride the fire trucks are good because they keep the BLS skills. I don't know. Well, the 101s are still running BLS, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, they are. They're running.
Yeah, everybody's getting their fair share.
There's no
everything.
There's nowhere to hide now. 911 is, we went from we went from a fire department to an EMS fire department to all hazards department.
Right. So you're running everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So back to you. You take the captain's test.
I pass it, and and there's a gentleman down at another firehouse in Kensington that did not pass it, that I thought was one of my friends. And this is when I had a big wake-up call that not everybody's your friend. They may talk to your face like they're your friend. So, he basically said, fuck that bitch. I can't believe she passed and I didn't.
Wow.
Yep. So, Eric Houston gives me this phone call, and he's the one that says, hey, you need to be careful about who your friends are and who are not your friends. Again, and that's when I started really realizing that that there was still a lot going on, even though we're getting deeper into the 90s, that there's still that dividing line about who is who and who's not who.
Yeah.
It's pretty disappointing. But anyway.
Yeah, it's true. We continue to do is try to rise above it and develop personal relationships with people. And hopefully that can supersede this tribal mentality that sometimes we have.
So that was one of the biggest wake-up calls in my life. And I said, you know what? I said, F these guys. I said, that just fueled me. And it fueled me from that day on. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be the best I can be. I'm going to treat everybody the same. And I'm going to do the best job I can do.
Nice.
So I'm all happy because I'm getting promoted to captain. But Steve Hobbs had better visions for me in life. He decided that he would put my name for me to go up to headquarters to go work, because he said I needed to go do that atmosphere for a little while to learn something new.
Okay.
So that's where they sent me up to headquarters and I actually got to work in the disciplinary action office and policy writing.
Oh, wow.
Something very different.
It was very different. We also did the hiring, so that was neat. And I got to do promotional tests. I got to help with hiring. So anybody that listens to this, if you ever get the opportunity to work on assessment centers or write promotional tests, it's the best thing you can ever do for yourself to get promoted.
Yep, I can agree with that. I just got to be on the past committee to help put together this last lieutenants and masters test, and it was a fantastic experience.
Best thing you can ever do to help yourself to get promoted. So at the time, Chief Grover was he was called a director, kind of the fire chief, beginnings of a fire chief.
He was director, yeah.
Yep. So when we would get a disciplinary action, it would come into our office. I would research what policies were violated, put it together, and then the chief in charge of our division would run it to Chief Grover. He would decide what we wanted done, and then we would serve out the sentence. One day, he was not available to take it to Chief Grover, our chief, so he sent me to do it. So I walked in there, And he told me what he wanted done. I came back, reported it. And he said, did he yell at you? And I said, no, why would he? He goes, well, he usually yells at me every time I go down there. I said, well, he didn't yell at me. He goes, huh. So the next time one needed to walk down, he's like, do you mind walking it down? I was like, nope, walked it down. So about the third or fourth time he had me walk it down, Chief Grover said, why are you coming down here every time? I said, I don't know. I said, I guess because you don't yell at me. And he's like, those candy asses, whatever. So after that, he and I developed this relationship. So then he would come, and he would walk by and he would say, come on, we're going to lunch. So he and Debbie Shaw and I would go out to lunch most days. So one day in the elevator, he looked at me and he said, you're the one. And I said, I'm the one what? He said, you're the one that was involved in that case a couple years back. And I said, what case? He said, the one involving that captain.
Oh, wow.
And I said, and he kind of rehashed it. And I said, I was. And he said, we were going to fire that man. And he said, but you said you didn't want him fired. And I said, I did not want him fired. And I said, again, I just never wanted to work with him again. And he said, well, we would have fired him if you wanted us to. He said, because he was 100% wrong. He acknowledged he was 100% wrong. And he acknowledged he deserved to be fired.
Wow.
So that was validating that it is important if you were put in a bad position. First, you say no and get yourself out of the position, but it is okay to report.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's excellent.
Yeah.
And even though you trying to not be labeled and all that, you have to push through that.
You have to push through it. And nobody ever knew about it, ever. It never came out. It's coming out right now. Nobody ever knew about it.
Wow.
I never told anybody.
Looking back on it, do you wish you would have reported it and got him fired?
Nope. I would still do the same thing to this day because I wouldn't want to, because I told him no and he never bothered me again.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, he did call me one time and he apologized and I accepted his apology, but I did not want to, that was it.
Gotcha.
That's
We pause that truck is here.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right. All right. Stop. Don't bark. All right.
Okay.
So anyway, so I do my time up at headquarters, positive experience. And you're usually supposed to do 2 years when you do a staff job like that. However, because the captain's test was immediately gone, as I said, because there were more positions than people that took it or that passed it, they did another captain's test within 18 months. So I only did 18 months on the 12th floor. So generally when you do a staff job like that, they give you pick of where you want to go. So in that era, I pretty much, you kind of had the ability, you could have kind of picked and they almost would transfer somebody out for you if you wanted that. Right.
Wow.
Well, yeah, I did not want to do that because I was not going to say, oh, well, I want that place. So just move that person so I could have that job. Cause I mean, that's just not fair.
Yeah, that's bad.
So I just took the vacancy that was out there, which was at the time 4C.
Oh, okay.
Sandy Spring. I liked Sandy Spring. It was fun. It was very, very slow. I'd never worked at a slow firehouse before. So I went there. I got there in 98 and I stayed there somewhere along the line because now I'm qualified, to take the battalion chief test.
Yeah.
Right. So I get in there and I take the test and I get on the battalion chief's test and get on the list for that and get a position in 2000.
Wow, you a battalion chief since 2000?
Yeah, in 2000, I got promoted to battalion chief, and I don't know if there was anybody younger, but at the time, I was the youngest one to get battalion chief. I was 33.
Okay. Oh, were you the first female battalion chief?
No.
I don't know if I was or not.
Wasn't there a female chief, EMS chief?
Mary Beth Micus
Yeah, but she got hired that way, right? Is that what
got
the?
hired as one.
Okay, all right.
I may have been the first one that came up all the way as a firefighter.
Yeah, you might have been.
The other females, I think, were already paramedics. I don't know the answer to that question.
I think maybe you were.
I don't know that. Yeah,
Okay.
because I know I was the first one as a firefighter only.
Okay.
Because I did the medic after I got there.
Well, still, that's a big
That's
thing.
a lot. Yeah, that is.
Yeah.
Uncharted territory. Yeah.
And I, like I said, I took the medic class because every day Mike McAdams wrote EMS equals $signs.
He was right.
That's right.
Right. So where'd you end up as battalion chief?
I ended up in Battalion 1 alongside of Steve Lohr and Billy Ale. They had me with those two, and it was a great work experience. So those two were really, really good. And yeah, and it was, I mean, first off, Battalion 1 has always kind of been labeled like the firefighting battalion. The guys that go there want to be there.
Yep.
Right.
There's really no specialty teams in Battalion 1. It's very unique because you have the high rises, you have some rural area, you have some non-hydrant area, you run into PG County, and it was my home. Basically, my whole career, I had worked at this point, Connecticut Avenue East. And I was home. I was back at Station 12 and I was home.
Nice.
Yep. Nice. And now I'd been on C shift my whole career. So now I'm on B shift. So it was something new. And, but I pretty much knew everybody still. I knew a lot of the people. The only captain I didn't know was Jerry Graham. He was a little intimidating at first because he was such a big guy. But I got to know that he was really a very nice guy. And just all the shifts were just so great. And it was just so easy being a battalion chief because like you would go on a call and just everything fell into place. Hold on. No. You're gonna have to pause for a second.
All right.
No. It's a very easy place to work. Everybody did their job. And I was just happy-go-lucky.
Living your best life again.
Living my best life. And we did a lot of cool things. We had good influences. Charles Bailey and I did some cool things together. There was a strip mall up in 29's area that they were going to tear down. So we ran drills up there. We ran dispatch drills up there. I don't know if you all remember those.
I remember those. Yeah.
Because if you had these planned drills where we would do box alarm drills, people would call out sick because they didn't want to.
They don't want to be part of it, so you got to surprise them. Yeah.
So we would do these dispatch drills. We would get up to the drill site and we would call communications, and they would put basically a box alarm together that would have to drive up their routine. And the drills were not punitive. They were just going through the exercises of running a box alarm. So we utilized this building and did it on our shift. We set up having a high-rise burn in downtown Silver Spring.
Oh, Road to Road. Classic. Road to Road is incredible.
Yeah, to be able to have a live burns in a building in downtown Silver Spring. I would do live burns anywhere in the county. Some of the battalion chiefs didn't want to facilitate them, so I was always happy to go. But my deal was, I got to take an engine and truck out of Battalion 1 would have to come with me, and to go to wherever we went throughout the county, and we just would go train. And I was always in on doing it, so it was a good time, and it was good training, and I love doing that kind of stuff. And hindsight, I should have stayed a battalion chief forever. I would have been like Mark Davis, staying forever.
Yeah, he stayed as a battalion chief for a long
He
time.
did.
Mhm.
He did. And he and I probably would have had that long run together, except for he got hired before me. So his run would have been longer. But Tom Carr was our fire chief, and he was really pushing on me to become an assistant chief. And so when I went on day work, I started taking college classes at night because I had the ability to since I was on day work. And so I went and added up my credits to see where I was. And I had enough credits. I had 93 credits. I had a 2-year degree and this mixed match of stuff I had taken. So I had 93 credits. I had enough credits to take the assistant chief's test. So I put in an application to do it. And the night before the test, I backed out because I did not want to do it. I liked being a battalion one. It's where I wanted to be. And Tom Carr was not real happy that I did it, but he understood. But he made me promise I would take the next one. So along comes the next one, and I took it, and I did very well on it. I set the curve on it, which I was very impressed with myself because I had a rail incident, and that was definitely not my forte. And I did take the promotion that time.
Okay.
And
Gotcha.
I'm going to tell you that taking a promotion is very good for your retirement, but it was probably the most unhappy I was in my career.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've heard that a lot.
I
Yeah.
should have stayed the battalion chief. Probably being the lieutenant at 25 and the battalion chief were the two best times I had, and maybe the wagon driver. That was a pretty good time too. But definitely the battalion chief. And you know, when I was a battalion chief, it was very long nights because I did not do paperwork during the day. I was in the stations. I was, you know, out visiting, whatever. Just, you know, if somebody was doing a drill, I'd go to their drill. Like I said, we did these dispatch drills. I tried to be interactive with everybody. I wanted to be involved. I didn't want to be alone. You know, I go eat lunch every day. I ate lunch at a different station. I generally ate dinner at 12, unless somebody else invited me for dinner. I was very interactive with all the stations. And I usually didn't start paperwork till 9 o'clock at night. So I was usually up till 12:30 or 1 every night doing paperwork because during the daylight hours, I wanted to be with the people.
Right.
I wanted to keep that connection. And
Yeah,
then when you went
important.
to, go ahead.
No, it's
Yes,
important.
very
Yeah.
important. Yeah, very important. And, you know, and these guys, you know, they would do anything that needed to be done. Like the last minute, you know, I would say, you know, something would come down the line where they need something done. And I could call any station and say, hey, can you all do me a favor? You know, I know it's last minute, but they need such and such to go to the academy. And they would go because we just had such a cohesive bond together as a group.
Good.
And then I went up to the assistant chief, and you just get so separated from that. You know,
Yeah, you do.
you do.
As assistant chief, you do. You know, battalion chief, you're still kind of there, but
Yeah, as assistant, and you know, and I did still try to stay connected, but I just, you know, I didn't like that Bethesda area. It just wasn't my cup of tea over there. And I hung on for like 3.5 years, and then, you know, they were giving me projects to do I didn't like, and you know, I said enough is enough, and I ran my numbers one day, and probably about 4 months before I left, I ran my numbers, and I was literally going to bring home the same money I was making.
So there you go.
There you go. And I even proposed to them that I would take a demotion back, and they were like, "You can't do that." And I was like, "Why can't I?" Well, nobody's ever done that. And I, you know, hindsight, I probably should have just done it and lived my best life. But
I remember, and I know maybe you remember that high-rise fire at the promenade. Do you remember that high-rise fire at the promenade?
The Pooks Hill.
Pooks Hill.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one where we started doing the police fire powwows after that.
Yeah, that was very that was a good little bit of fire, but it was just so many people. And then anybody attacked you what exactly happened at the Chiefs buggy? Something happened, or
so there was just a lot going on at the buggy, and a police officer came up to me, and I think it was one of their supervisors, and wanted to know what what the police needed to do. At the time, I didn't know what he wanted, but one of the engine crews, the officer had gone on the elevator and the firefighter had not.
Right.
So they were separated and presumably okay, but we were trying to figure out where they were.
Right.
I had Lavere with me, the scheduler. He was on a fire. We had 2 channels because, we were trying to navigate stuff. He was trying to help because we had a staging area. So he was managing a channel. The fire was still active. Somebody was trying to bring a burn patient down. There was just so much going on. This one firefighter was separated from his officer. And I had this police officer coming over to the buggy trying to ask me something. And I put up my finger, just give me 1 minute. And I guess some time passed by. And again, he came over again and things still had not calmed down. And I did it again. And he got mad. And he walked over to somebody and said, the police are leaving. And that firefighter came over to me, or whoever it was, and said, the police are all leaving. And I said, whatever. So I said, do me a favor, take a piece of apparatus, block the complex. I said, that's all we need the police for is direct traffic. I said, just block the complex. That way we'll be protected. So we did, and we blocked in a police officer or 2. And apparently we caused a traffic nightmare out on the roads. And so he was mad because the police officer wanted to know what they needed to be done on the fire ground. Well, at that moment, I did not need him. Direct traffic, I don't know. Do whatever you all do on fires. So about that, a couple minutes later, probably 10 minutes later, I get a phone call from the fire chief it was Tom Carr still at the time. And he said, what's going on down there? And I said, what do you mean what's going on down there? He said, did you piss the police off? I said, well, no, they just said they were leaving. And he said, did you not talk to their supervisor? I said, well, he kept coming up to me. I said, but this, that, or the other was going on. Mm-hmm. And I said, I just didn't have time to talk to him. So he said he was leaving. So we blocked the complex. He goes, well, you got traffic backed up. I said, well, tell them to come back. And he said, they're not coming back. And I said, well, I don't know what to tell you. I was mitigating a fire. That was more important at the moment, trying to find where this firefighter, this captain were, blah, blah, blah. And I said, that was more important than answering his question for that 1 second. I said, I think at this point they should know what to do on a fire. All right, I'm on my way down. So he came down, we all worked it out. So that's when they started these, bilateral year meetings with police and fire so we could understand how to communicate with each other.
Right. That fire was challenging. I remember I was on it. I was on 20's engine, and they had 2 fires, and they had fire in one apartment, but had come out and someone had left the door open, and it creeped all the way down the hallway, and you were getting charged smoke all the way at the end of the hallway, and the elevator was an issue. It was a lot of stuff going on that.
And the most important part was when we pulled up, not one single person was outside of a high-rise fire because the alarm company had been in there earlier that day. Yes. And it put a piece of cardboard in between the sensors because they were working on the alarm system, and they forgot to take the piece of because they didn't want it to go off every time they worked on it. And they forgot to take the piece of cardboard out. So now someone pulls a pull station and nothing. So wow. you had probably, so the woman set the fire that was burned. Mm-hmm. So you had this burn patient, and then you had probably 700 people calling 911 that they were trapped in their apartment.
Oh my gosh.
And I had this police officer coming up to my window saying, can I talk to you? And I'm like, nah.
Yes. I think it was the South Tower or the North. I think it was the South one.
I don't remember. And there was fire blowing out of a top floor. Yeah.
Yeah. When you could see it. There was fire showing all down the road. Yeah. Yeah. English was, I think Captain English was the officer on the wagon, if I can remember correctly. And it was a while ago. Was it, I think it was right after 9/11, to be honest.
No. That's a different one then. This one, because this one had to have been after 2007, because that's when I got promoted.
Okay.
To assistant chief. This is a different one.
All right. Okay.
But this one was still challenging.
Yeah.
So needless to say, the police officer and his request dropped way down on the priority list.
Yeah, well, yeah. And he was mad with me, but whatever.
Yeah.
Move on. At that point in my life, I was way beyond any guy being mad at me.
Yeah.
And I really didn't care at that point in life.
So, did you do the drop?
I did not.
Okay.
All I did was deferred comp, because that's another thing that Chief Allwing told me. He said, I know you're young and I know you don't understand and you can't see the future. He said, I don't care if you put $25 in a paycheck. He said, you start putting in money in deferred comp, and anytime you can add more money into it, you add more money into it. He said, because I promise you one day you're going to thank me for this. And I do.
Do you regret not taking the drop, or do you wish you could have done 3 years or tried, or what is it?
I wish in general I'd stayed longer. I really do. But like I said, at the time, I really just was not happy working up in that shift chief's office. They made a change of all the assistant chiefs, and I requested to change. At one point, I'd been on A shift for a temporary detail, and I requested to change and stay on A shift. And they moved almost everybody around but me. And I just, and then they were like, well, now, sorry, we'll pick a place you want to go and we'll just move you there. Don't leave. We'll move, just pick the spot. And I'm like, really? Now I'm going to piss somebody off because pick the spot and we'll put you there? No, I'm not doing that either.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, and I probably should have just stuck it out another maybe 6 months to see if things got better. But I just, sometimes you just get to the point where you're just like, I'm done. And my stepson said it right. My tombstone is not going to say you should have done 3 more years on the job.
No, you're right. It's not going to say that. So
It's not going to say that, but
how quick was the decision? Like you said, I looked at my numbers. Then you said, okay, I'm leaving in 6 weeks. So how did you do that?
Well, no. So it wasn't that quick. So I probably looked at my numbers. I started talking about it in the summertime. So this is another thing that was interesting. I started talking about it in the summer, talking. I didn't do any paperwork. I didn't do anything. I was talking. Remember how I told you that when you talk, people hear things, people do things, people react?
Yep.
I started talking, and I guess around August, the fire chief went and duplicated my position. And
Wow.
I had not done anything. September, they filled my position. They promoted into my position. And then I started getting phone calls every other week. Are you leaving? I was like, no, I hadn't done anything. So,
wow.
yeah. So I actually got pressure from some other people higher up that said, you ought to stay another year or two. Because the fire chief, on a rumor that I was going to leave, duplicated my position and promoted another assistant chief.
Hmm.
So that fire chief never talked to you about it?
Mm.
Wow.
Nope.
Yeah, maybe it's time to go.
Promoted one of his friends, though. Anyway, another story.
Oh.
Don't even worry about that.
Right.
And I'm very happy. I'm very happy for the person he promoted because he deserved it.
Oh, okay, well.
But So anyway, there was a big contingency that said, you don't do that. You don't promote a vacancy until there's a vacancy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No
So,
good.
and I stayed until December.
All right.
Right.
Do you remember your last day?
December 1, 2010.
Was there anything that eventful that happened that shift, or
that was my last. Like I left, like I didn't come to work that day. No, nothing.
Okay.
Nothing eventful.
I didn't tell nobody. I just broke camp.
Just gone.
Just gone. Yep.
Wow.
Gotcha.
Yep. No fanfare. Just left.
Gotcha.
Like I said, I was just done.
Well, I mean, you're happy now.
I am. And like I said, hindsight, I would have stayed longer, and I should have stayed longer because, best job in the world. The only job I really had, I worked at a gas station as a full service gas attendant until I became a firefighter. The only 2 jobs I've ever had in my life.
Okay.
That's a pretty good career, though.
That is a very good career.
Great career.
Very successful. Extremely successful.
So tell us what that first month was like after you retired.
Well, because I did my life a little bit backwards and, had the girls.
Oh,
So,
yeah. That's right.
So, I got to stay home and hang out instead of going on shift work and not hanging out.
So you retired and had kids.
Well, I already had the one.
Okay.
I'd had her before I retired.
Okay.
So, yeah, like I worked all the way through my pregnancy towards the end. So, like, I didn't really miss a beat except for when I was off with her.
Okay.
So that's pretty.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool, being older parents because, we're financially stable. We can travel. We can do everything that they want to do.
Yeah.
So it's neat.
That's great. I mean, essentially, you had your daughters, and then you're retired, so you can pretty much be a stay-at-home mom and take care of them.
And take care of them. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
That's great.
It is. It's fun because, I miss that a lot with my son because I worked a lot with him because, financially I had to work with him. So, yep.
Gotcha.
Nope. It's a good time. It's young. Or some days I'm like, whew.
Yes, it's challenging in its own way, that.
Especially girls.
Yeah. So yeah, what does life look like for you now?
Like, what do you mean? So
I guess you're like your
normal
routine.
day.
Like, yeah, like what?
So, we live on a little farmette. So I grew up in a townhouse. We have farm animals, which is totally different from what I grew up with. So we, animals have to eat every morning, every evening. We have to feed them. So that's different. During COVID, we didn't ever worry about food. We always had eggs.
Okay.
Luckily, we didn't have to take anybody out because, we were able to always go to grocery stores and never ran out of food. But we did have a backup plan living outside if we ever had to.
Okay.
The girls were like, we're not killing. I'm like, well, if we got to eat, somebody might have to go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They're our last,
They were our last resorts, but
right.
Yeah.
Somebody out there might have to go if we got to eat.
Right. If it's going to be you or the chickens, it's going to be the chickens.
Right.
Yeah. So we, we do a lot of traveling. We do basically whatever we want.
Okay. So now you wake up in the morning, you feed the animals. Before you feed the animals, and you look in the mirror, who's the person looking back at you?
I'm happy. I'm very happy. So, so I am going to tell you that I do hang out at a volunteer firehouse.
Okay.
Because I struggled with getting rid of my EMT. I know everybody in the world says, who cares about your EMT? But I got it when I was in high school or towards the end of my high school. And I've had 2 jobs in my life. I'm not going back to be a gas station attendant.
Look at that. Always have something, a plan B or C, just in case.
It's funny because down here it's 100% volunteer in the firehouses, and they just brought in career EMS within the last couple of years. And I've actually they're on their second EMS chief. And both times they've called me to take the job.
Oh, wow.
And well, there's one requirement that I refuse to get, and that's become a paramedic.
Oh.
And they've actually looked it up, and apparently there is a way I can get my paramedic back. I guess you can go back and challenge National Registry. I guess you just go back. I don't know. They've looked it all up, and there is a way I can do it. Both times when the job was open, they've asked me to apply for it, and I said, if you want a manager, I'm in. You have paramedics in your staff, your work staff. I said, but I am not getting my paramedic back. And they said, well, you can't apply if you're not a paramedic. And I said, well, I'm not getting it back. It doesn't interest me that much to work. I don't need to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Some stress you don't need.
Right. Yeah. Because it's very, I can't imagine being a startup.
Yeah.
I've lived through a system that was a startup and saw the challenges of it. And that, that was a fire department. Challenges of just an EMS only department. That's a lot because you know how hard it is just to get EMS providers.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
For sure. Gotcha.
anyway, I would say my biggest accomplishment was I became a tanker driver.
Okay.
I never worked at any stations with a tanker, so that was a whole new feat in itself.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is
it is
cool.
kind of cool.
Keeping
So,
those skills up.
yeah. So, and I really didn't pump anything since, the early 90s. So that was a whole new thing,
Wow. Reintroduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
but was pumping again. So anyway,
Cool. Cool.
so kind of fun.
Nice. I wanted to ask you this. So, I mean, you definitely had some unique experiences as a female in the fire service. Unfortunately, some really challenging experiences,
Yes.
tough ones,
Yeah.
and having to prove yourself constantly again over and over in different stations and situations. That on top of just the things that we see as firefighters that can be pretty horrific at times. So uh, back then, I mean, there was no emphasis at all on mental health, really much at all. So
Man.
how did you take care of yourself mentally, having to deal with all of the things that you had to deal with?
I mean, looking back, I don't think it really actually bothered me. I mean, I don't know. I never told anybody any of it. I guess I just kept it all in. I don't know.
Just moved on.
I just moved on.
Yeah.
I just moved on. I mean, even the most terriblest calls I ever ran, I feel like I just got this file cabinet and just file them away. You know, yeah, the mental health thing is definitely terrible. I will say probably one of the worst days ever was the day when Poon was missing.
Yes.
I came to work and the communications called and they were like, we're missing somebody. And I was like, okay, well, you want me to get the scheduler? Like, I thought they'd called me because the scheduler didn't answer the phone. And they said, we're missing somebody. And I was like, well, let me get the scheduler. And they're like, no, we're missing somebody. I'm like, okay, what do you mean we're missing somebody? Well, he turned in all of his stuff. It's here. We don't know where he is. And I said, okay, who have you called? What have you done? Well, we've called you. And I said, okay. And I said, well, let's figure out a plan. Let's get this going. And I made notifications and they started trying to ping his phone and, and it was just terrible. It was like an all day thing because it was back when pinging phones just started and we kept getting these pings like in different spots. And we kept just thinking that, okay, he's here. And, and he was gone. And it was just awful. I mean, it was just awful. Everybody that has taken their life was awful because we all knew them.
Mm-hmm.
We all knew them. And, but that one was the worst because like I got so involved in the whole thing and there was just so much hope. And it's just, then the feeling you get when you just know they're gone is just awful. And the questions afterwards about why, like, with Kenny Bristol, because he was always so happy.
Oh, Kenny.
His face, he was just so happy all the time.
That's a name that's early 90s. That's mid 90s. Yeah.
You remember his smile? I mean, he was so happy all the time,
He was. And no one saw this coming. No one.
No, there was like that time period. Every 18 months, somebody took their life. Every 18 months.
Wow.
Clockwork, every 18 months, somebody took their life. And it was awful.
We've come a long way mental health wise here in this county. Across the country, I think we have. So,
but they're still doing it. People are still taking their lives.
Yeah, they are.
And I don't know how, I mean, how do we help them?
It's a uphill battle, and I don't know.
It is. I mean, it's just, people just have to be nice to each other and treat everybody with respect because you don't know what internal battle somebody's going through.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely.
No doubt about it.
Because everybody's in this together. I don't care who you are, what you look like. We're all in this together.
I try to tell people all the time.
Yeah.
No one gets out of life.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
And it doesn't take any time at all to reach out to someone and say, hey, how you doing? a text, an email, a phone call, DM, anything. It doesn't take anything. And then you might not think it's anything, but that might be the thing that stops somebody from doing something that they'll regret.
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Or just thinking about something you say before you say it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Anyway. Yeah. Whew.
No. I mean, you left so I won't say abruptly. You left so abruptly. I don't know if anybody's told you this, but from the citizens of Montgomery County and to the people you work with, thank you, man. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it.
Yes.
You did a great job.
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry I left so abruptly, but I just, there was just so much in the background. I was just like, and it just, the hits just kept on going. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just done.
Yeah. Well, the time you spent in the field, the ripple effects still go on to this day.
They do.
Like we said before we started recording, I mean, that the people who are been in the job for as long as I have and as long as Tony have and people all in between, they still remember you. And I have not met one person who's had anything bad to say about you who worked with you or
Nope.
worked under you as a chief. So yes, thank you for all that you did and all that you were to us.
Well, thank you all very much. And I miss everyone. And it was the best ride, the best time.
Yes,
Awesome.
ma'am.
Definitely.
Awesome. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
I'm on Facebook, or I guess my email, or I guess shoot me a text.
Okay.
We could figure that out.
Yes.
Maybe
Hit her up. Hit her up.
through you all could share.
Okay.
How about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll put your information in the show
We
notes.
will.
Okay. Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that.
Okay.
Awesome.
So
Well, Vanessa DeVries, Assistant Chief Vanessa DeVries, thank you so very much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much,
Great
Vanessa.
talking to you.
thank you. And there's probably a whole lot more I could have shared. So
Yeah.
it's going through my head now, but it's okay.
Hey, if you want to do a part 2, we're down.
We can. We're open for that. Yeah, we can revisit this.
Maybe we'll think about that.
Well,
All right.
thank you very
all.
much.
All right.
Take
Bye.
care. Thanks for listening to the When the Smoke Clears podcast. Be sure to check out our social media pages on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Just search for the When the Smoke Clears podcast. Feel free to email us at whenthesmokeclears8@gmail.com. That's whenthesmokeclears and the number 8@gmail.com. You can also support the show by going to the website buymeacoffee.com/whenthesmokeclears and donating however much you'd like.